Hey there, I'm Brent Ehrler with Lucky Craft, and let's talk pond fishing. That is something that I absolutely love doing. That's what I grew up doing, like we all did. Every one of us as kids growing up, we obviously went to a pond at some point and got the bug. We got hooked on fishing. That's exactly how I did it. There was a little pond in Redlands, California, where I grew up. It's called Ford Pond. There's two little lakes there. That was the first place I'd ever gone fishing. My dad took me there as a kid, and I caught bluegill with little night crawlers and catfish. I mean, whatever bit at the time. So this was prior to me ever knowing anything about bass fishing. I mean, I was going out there and throwing a bobber, and whatever pulled the bobber under is what I caught, and absolutely loved it. And it wasn't until later on that I realized how many bass are in these ponds, not only in these ponds in Southern California, but across the country. There are so many city lakes around these bigger towns, bigger cities that actually have a lot of fish in them and a lot of bass, and the bass fishing is excellent. There's so many places across the country that are not pressured. You know, that they're maybe private ponds. Those are the best ones to go to. But if you can't go to a private pond, you go to these city ponds, and sometimes it's harder to catch the fish. So let's talk about the two different scenarios on how we can catch them on the heavily pressured public city ponds versus some of those private ponds, and the different baits and what we can do to catch more fish when we get there. So let's start with the easier ones. Let's go with those private ponds that are have a lot of fish in them that don't get fished a lot. In those situations, I'm going to fish a lot of the same baits that I do if I was out in a big lake. You know, take a 1.5 for example. Any of these diving crankbaits, the 1.5 DD, I'm going to take these baits, I'm going to fish them on those deeper sections of the lake because I'm going to be walking from the shore. You know, if it has any kind of concrete structure on it, or maybe riprap, you know, that has rock on it. Any place that's a little bit deeper is where I'm going to throw the lipped crankbaits, I mean, the 1.5 DD and the 1.5. The reason for that is that you're fishing on the bank, and if it's shallow water, you're throwing out, that bait's going to be digging coming up. So I try to get to where I can get, you know, that little bit deeper water and throw a little bit more parallel to the bank with the build crankbaits like that. Then we have the LV 150 and the LV 100. You know, these are lipless crankbaits. You can fish these in shallow water. These are great choices if there's a lot of grass in the lake that isn't topped out. If it's subsurface grass, go with that LV 100 or the 150. That's something you can cast and wind it, let it ball up in the grass, snap it free. Excellent choice for covering water on those little ponds and fishing from the bank. A lot of ponds that I fished growing up, I promise you I could take that 150 and cast it almost all the way across the pond. That's the other good thing about having a bait like that, is you can make a long cast and cover almost the entire pond, even from just one side of the pond, and not have to walk around the entire thing. Jerkbait, pointer 78, always a great bait to catch fish on, even in ponds. Same thing with the build baits. I'm not gonna want to throw it where it's really shallow. I'm gonna throw it on that side of the lake that has a little bit more depth to it. The other thing I might do with this is have the rod tip up high when I'm snapping that bait to keep it a little bit higher in the water column. This is really just for those really shallow ponds. You know, if it has a lot of deep water, then have at it. Cast parallel to those deep sections of the pond. A great bait. Now for me, pond fishing, especially in the late spring, summer, and fall, topwater is such a good bait. A lot of the ponds across the country are shallow, so the topwater is not going to get hung up on any kind of structure that's in the water. If there's grass in the water, you know, that topwater Sammy 100 is going to stay right on top and have a more effective cast and be in that strike zone for longer. So that kind of covers the broad spectrum of the baits you can use in pond fishing, especially in those unpressured ponds that a lot of people don't fish in. Now, like me and a lot of people where we live, those ponds are very pressured. A lot of people fish there. This whole choice that we kind of went on is going to be a little bit tougher to catch the fish. So Lucky Craft has made a lot of baits that are excellent for those highly pressured pond fishing scenarios. So let's go with the build baits first. This right here is a 0.5 DD. It's a smaller little crankbait. So if you have deeper water there, the fish are pressured, you want to downsize. It's a finesse style crankbait. Same thing with a square bill. That's the 0.5 square bill. This is going to be an excellent scenario for a little bit shallower water as opposed to the DD. But again, a finesse your body. It's a small little bait. This is perfect for those highly pressured lakes. And I mean, believe me, I've caught a lot of fish in the big lakes, big tournament situations on that 0.5 one on to match the hatch. Now, let's take it down even smaller, the 0.3. The 0.3 is that real finessey little crankbait. Now, you can throw this in quite a bit shallower water as opposed to the 0.5. Just because it's a smaller bait, it's not gonna dive as deep. That right there is a little gumdrop. That thing right there is gonna catch a lot of fish across the country in those little high pressured ponds. And that color, it's a little BE gill. It's a little bluegill colored, little tiny crankbait. There's so many bluegill in these ponds. Match that hatch, throw that bluegill color. Now, lipless crankbait. How about the LV50? Look at this right here, as opposed to the LV100. The 100 is one of the smaller series if you think about big lakes, big ponds. That's a 3/8 ounce. That one's a little bit smaller. Look at the size difference between those two. That's the LV50. That right there is also going to be a phenomenal pond fishing bait for one of those high pressured ponds. I can't wait to go to Ford Park by my house and throw this LV50 now. I didn't know we had it. It's very subtle, very small. I can fish it in real shallow water. I can fish it in a little bit deeper water just by slowing it down. The LV50 is a great choice for that. Now, like the pointer that I talked about earlier, we have it in a pointer 65. So just downsize. I'm assuming you're seeing the theme here. We're downsizing for those high pressured scenarios. So city lakes, a lot of people fishing. Those people are walking those banks daily. It doesn't matter if they're not fishing for bass, they might be fishing for catfish. Them casting a bait in the water is gonna affect those bass and they may not eat a bigger bait. So pointer 65. It's also silent. That silent bait is gonna be very subtle, be very finessey, and therefore trigger those fish that are highly pressured. Now, top water, Sammy 100 for those bigger ponds. Well, guess what? Those high pressured ones, the Sammy 65. The Sammy 65 is gonna be a great high pressured pond fishing situation where there's a lot of structure in the water. You can cast it across the whole pond. You won't hang on anything that's subsurface. Plus, the fish in ponds love a top water. So the Sammy 65 is a great scenario for that. Think about those ponds that are near you that you fish and adjust your baits accordingly. If you're fishing in private ponds or very little pressured ponds, go with those bigger baits, those ones that those fish will have no problem eating. If you're in those high pressured situations, think about downsizing and going to those smaller baits. And it's a good way to catch more fish in that pond fishing scenario.